Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for coming. This morning we want to address a critical issue, but I want to pause, and I'm sure my fellow members of our caucus, Jenica Atwin of Fredericton and Paul Manley from Nanaimo Ladysmith, and I want to acknowledge that a lot of Canadians right now and a lot of our media are rightfully absorbed in the story of the question of COVID-19, how dangerous it might be, what precautions we take as individuals. We certainly understand that this is a time of uncertainty for Canadians. We are very much concerned as well about COVID-19, but the other issues that preoccupy this country don't go away, particularly the climate crisis, which is upon us, and which certainly is a much larger public health threat than COVID-19. It happens to be a slower moving one, but our opportunities to avoid the tipping points that will lead to potentially the loss of human civilization and the world as we know it. These are not hyperbolic words, these are scientifically correct.
The evidence for links between CO2 as a greenhouse gas and temperature, and there's zero evidence for it except models. And models are based on that hypothetical link, the climate sensitivity, right, which is under reevaluation by the scientists, by the modelers themselves, but you never hear about this in the media. In fact, the IPCC has their science report demonstrate, you read it, you see, oh, these guys really don't know what the climate sensitivity is.
Is measured now, our opportunities to avoid that are measured in months and not years. So it is concerning that as Canadians who recognize the urgency of the climate crisis organize and take steps to demand that governments act, conservative politicians in this country are ramping up the rhetoric of polarization against climate activists and Canadians of all walks of life who have decided to stand up, whether in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en,
Native people could shut this whole country down because all the transportation corridors go through our reserves and territories. The pipelines are a transportation. It's always been about these transportation corridors to get these stolen goods off of our lands from point A to point B, and that's how Canada got very wealthy with this trade of goods stolen off of Indigenous territories that we've never once got compensated for. It would actually bankrupt Canada and Great Britain if they were to ever even consider compensation. But my father said it's one of the biggest tools we have, compensation, because when we stand on that, it's unquantifiable, it'll bankrupt them. My father would say, when you owe Visa money, you don't answer the phone. He would say, we're Big Visa. They're not answering the phone.
Whether or not the colonial police dismantle this blockade violently and with contempt, others will grow in its place. As long as Trudeau refuses to listen to the hereditary chiefs, as long as the RCMP occupies Wet'suwet'en territory, as long as this failed pipeline project is not cancelled, the colonial Canadian state will continue to be paralyzed. To all those who care about the future of the next generations, to all those who care about the water and the earth and life, to all those who respect Indigenous sovereignty, now is the time to act. Respond to the call of the hereditary chiefs. Block by all means the ports, bridges, roads, and rails everywhere now.
Or in climate-related events such as those organized by civil society and groups like Extinction Rebellion. Specifically, I was alarmed in the House of Commons on February 26 when I heard Andrew Scheer say, and I'll quote, "These are radical groups like Extinction Rebellion, an organization that has been listed as a terrorist organization in the United Kingdom."
These are radical groups like Extinction Rebellion, an organization that has been listed as a terrorist organization in the United Kingdom. So is the Prime Minister not embarrassed that he has shown less leadership and less of a backbone than radical protesters who just want to shut down our economy?
It is not true at all that Extinction Rebellion has been listed as a terrorist organization anywhere. In fact, because of precautions in the UK, their security committees have reported to Parliament that they did an assessment of Extinction Rebellion and concluded that it was not in any way a terrorist risk. It is a group dedicated to non-violent civil disobedience in order to pursue climate justice and climate action. It does create difficulties in society when the routes that citizens choose involve blocking traffic and so on, but to conflate nonviolent civil disobedience with criminal activity and terrorist activity, which engages a whole different level of our laws. Our anti-terrorist laws generally suspend civil liberties for people who are charged with terrorism. And public attitudes change when elected leaders attack groups that are nonviolent and call them terrorists. Mr. Scheer should be ashamed, and so should Premier Jason Kenney, who has attacked a wide range of groups with a number of words from left, urban, radical, green, foreign funded. And for a commentary on that type of polarization, I turn the microphone to Paul Manley. Je vais donner la parole à Paul Manley, député de Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Thank you. Yes, so the idea that we have foreign-funded radicals in this country who are involved in the debate over the oil industry is true. I would say that some of these foreign multinational corporations are very radical in their viewpoints and in the propaganda that they are feeding us. We just had an expose earlier on last week about how the information about LNG displacing coal and the greenhouse gases from coal was completely false information. The person that put this forward works for Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, and they left out the information about the end-to-end greenhouse gas emissions from fracked gas. And so the fracking process releases methane. Many of the wells are leaking. It leaks in the transmission process. It leaks all down the line. And Los Angeles and New York have identified that natural gas is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in those cities, and in districts in California, they're banning the installation of natural gas in new buildings and in neighborhoods.
Through researching that, I found the issues behind it, and they led to United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development. I found that this really wasn't something that was a conspiracy theory. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy fact. This plan is implemented in the United States. It is the biggest public relations scam in the history of the world. But it's far more than that. The agenda for the 21st century is a recipe for destruction. It enables and justifies monitoring and metering and restricting our energy and water usage through smart meters, instituting a carbon tax on industry, pulverizing our roads and destroying our dams, sinking our economy, exhausting our military with endless war, diagnosing a huge portion of our population with mental illness and drugging us, bleeding our transportation budget with high-cost trains to nowhere, revamping our school system by inserting sustainable development principles from pre-kindergarten all the way to postgraduate school, declaring our public lands off limits to humans, changing every land use document in the nation to require high-density housing in city centers in order to more easily control, monitor, and surveil us, allowing warrantless searches and seizures, domestic surveillance, identifying us as a potential enemy combatant in our own nation. You know, if an enemy was trying to destroy us, they couldn't do a better job. This is the erection of a corporatocracy. It is a global totalitarian state, and it is in progress right now. It doesn't come with flashing lights. It doesn't come with labels. As I said, you will not see it called Agenda 21. And I know it sounds crazy, and it definitely is crazy. I am not crazy. The plan is crazy.
And in fact, fracked gas, natural gas, methane is 85 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2, and so it is a climate killer. And that's in the first 15 years when it's released, it's 85 times more potent as a greenhouse gas. So this idea that foreign-funded radicals are, distorting the debate on oil and gas in this country is ridiculous. Because it is the foreign corporations who have been dictating, their policies and their interests to our government, and you can see that in the LNG Canada project. And LNG Canada is a misnomer. It's 5 foreign multinationals: Royal Dutch Shell, Mitsubishi, Petronas, which is a Malaysian state-owned corporation, Korean Gas, which is a state-owned corporation, and PetroChina, which is a state-owned corporation. And they have managed to get $5.4 billion in tax breaks from the British Columbia government, $275 million from the federal government. They are getting power at a rate that BC ratepayers would love to have, extremely low rates for paying for hydroelectricity from the Site C Dam, which is again being subsidized to the tune of $12 billion by ratepayers in British Columbia, to power the fracking fields in northeastern BC.
Wonderful that a member of the opposition is asking this question, because indeed we recognize that part of the tools to get this pipeline built is a price on carbon pollution right across the country. Canadians know that protecting the environment and growing the economy must go together. For 10 years, Stephen Harper and his Conservative Party were unable to protect the environment and therefore unable to grow the economy the way they should have.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister claims to be trying to build public support for this pipeline, perhaps he can explain to the House why his government gave a grant to an environmental lobby group that specifically used those funds to hire an activist to protest against the Trans Mountain project. Does the Prime Minister not realize that paying groups to protest against these projects is exactly part of the problem?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, unlike apparently the member of the Leader of the Official Opposition, we believe in free speech and we believe in advocacy on this side of the hood. But, Mr. Speaker, on the specific...
Foreign multinationals have influenced our governments in extraordinary ways to give them huge tax breaks. They've also influenced the government to give them royalty breaks. So the idea that we're going to, pay for our schools and hospitals and everything else by fracking in this country or by expanding the oil sands in this country is ridiculous. We give our resources away at very low royalty rates compared to other jurisdictions like Norway, which charges 24%. Here our average is around 1%. So we're giving the resource away. In British Columbia, 10 years ago, the royalties from natural gas were $1.2 billion per year. Last year it was $108 million, and that's despite a 70% increase in production. And so we're seeing production go up, royalty rates go down, and that's because they get a royalty credit for horizontal fracking, which is how all fracking is done these days. And there's a $2.4 billion credit sitting on the accounts for British Columbia for these royalty credits for horizontal fracking. So these foreign multinationals, this foreign influence in our oil and gas sector, have had a huge influence on government and continue to have a huge influence on government. The amount of money that comes in from organizations like Tides Canada is minuscule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and greetings from Vancouver. I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that anti-pipeline activism must also be addressed and that it cannot be ignored. False information must be refuted effectively, and the big multi-million-dollar funders behind anti-pipeline activism need to be dealt with. It is clear to me that anti-pipeline activism that we see today is part of a large international campaign funded substantially by American charitable foundations. Since 2009, more than 400 payments totaling $35 million have been made via the Tides Foundation alone. One of the important contributions that this committee could make to pipeline strategy development would be to get to the bottom of the motivations and indeed the identity of the big funders of anti-pipeline activism. I can speak to their identity and to some of their motivations based on what I have read from written strategy papers, grants, and so forth. All of the major pipeline proposals put forward today face staunch anti-pipeline activism. But this is not 1990s organized activism organized by unpaid volunteers. Today's anti-pipeline movement is a professionally staged effort designed and executed to grab the headlines and dominate the news. As the strategy paper for the anti-pipeline campaign says, the goal is to generate, and I quote, a steady drumbeat of bad press, end quote. That's exactly, of course, what anti-pipeline groups have been doing. Perhaps I will leave it to the senior advisor to the anti-pipeline tar sands campaign, a man from British Columbia named Jason Mogus.
But some movements have spent billions of dollars going nowhere. I know I've spent some of it. As a digital guy, I spent my career for a lot of clients building fake grassroots campaigns that tried to surround a target and make it seem like there was a social movement happening and scare them into making a decision.
To describe this new type of activism organized by paid employees, Mr. Mogus is the principal of a company called NetChange, formerly Communicopia, based on Salt Spring Island, and since 2012, he's been hired to orchestrate the anti-pipeline campaign. In his words, his job is to create the appearance of a movement. Mr. Mogus' firm does ghostwriting and provides support to some 60 First Nations and environmental groups involved in anti-pipeline activism. That is according to a job ad that Mr. Mogus posted to hire a new employee.
And they would love to have the kind of resources that pour in from these other corporations. I think it was $250 million was identified that they've poured into their propaganda campaigns against climate change. And so citizens need to fight back. I've been an environmentalist for decades, and I've never seen my check. I'd like to get my check, please. And with that, I'm going to pass it along to my colleague from Fredericton, Jenica.